Welcome to HP Fanfiction. Support me by subscribing the channel. Also, like and share the video to keep me motivated to make more videos like these. Steadying his breathing to calm the adrenaline, he glided through the barrier and into the bank, pausing to ensure no alarms were triggered. He had tested the cloak rigorously, and had learnt that it could not be summoned, be detected by wards, nor be damaged by standard spells. He had not, however, been able to test it against goblin magic, but the lack of activity at his entrance was a good sign that it was working just as well. Had he not had the cloak in his possessions, such a foray would be ludicrous to even consider. There was no doubt in his mind that he would have been discovered immediately. Somewhat calmer, he headed downwards, avoiding the waterfall and touching anything that may give away his presence. Though he was taking no chances. Luckily, he had inherited James Potter's talent for riding and was able to navigate himself through the craggy tunnels with little issue. This took longer than he would like, his broom not able to move as quickly or freely as the carts that could reach the deeper vaults in a matter of minutes. For Harry, it took close to an hour before spotted the black sigil on one of the open doors, a duo of goblins in full armor standing vigil over the open vault. He smirked at another stroke of genius he'd had whilst here. The previous day, he was aware that only a goblin could open the doors, thus he would need one available to help him into the strange vault, though the hope would not be given willingly. As such, he had requested a full audit of the Black Vault be carried out as soon as possible, as was his right as heir to the family. As one of the more prominent customers, he was informed that it would take a few days to complete but would be done as soon as possible. It had been a gamble to rely on the efficiency of the goblins, but one that had paid off. Had they not been carrying out the task for him, he would have had to find another way. Thankfully, this had not come to pass, and his plan seemed to be coming together smoother than he could have hoped. He watched the two unmoving figures for a few moments, considering what options he had. He had no wish to engage them, knowing it would be folly. Before he could hope to take them out, the alarms would be sounded and his chance of escape would be very slim, and he would have to do so without what he came for. His pondering continued until a guttural roar rent the air and his eyes widened. Dragons had been rumored to be used by the goblins here, but these had never been substantiated, dismissed as ridiculous mutterings of fools who had never even ventured this far into the bank. A sudden idea formed in his mind, more than a little reckless, but undoubtedly good if he could pull it off. Giving a final glance at the two guardians, he flew off in the direction he had heard the beast and soon came upon it. His mouth opened at the sheer size of it, the majesty of the dragon giving him cause to admire the spectacle. It was huge, at least double the size of the one he faced during the tournament, and one he had not come across during his time reading about them. Its scales were milky white, likely due to the amount of time it had lived in the darkness, and the eyes were a very pale blue. Its body was littered with scars from the apparent abuse it had received throughout its life, and Harry shook his head. It truly was a magnificent creature, and were he not here for something of such import, he would likely do all he could to set it free. Chastising himself for his lamentation, he aimed his wand from under the cloak and fired a strong stinging hex. His aim was true and the dragon roared in fury, more irritated than hurt by the spell hitting it in the eye. Taking aim again, he fired off another and hit the other eyes, sending the dragon into a frenzy. The ruckus caused by the beast reverberated off the walls of the tunnels in a series of roars and chains rattling loudly as it fought against his bonds. As hoped, the two goblins that had been guarding his family vault only a short distance away came into the clearing a few minutes later and began shaking a rather strange instrument each held, adding to the cacophony of noise the dragon was making. It saddened him to watch the creature flinch, as it did at the sound as he swept away on his broom, knowing he had but a small window of opportunity to carry out the next phase of his plan. The goblins would not abandon their post for long, and the dragon was already silent by the time he reached the open vault. Dismounting, he crept through the door of his family vault, and waited for the other goblins to return, expecting an exchange between the one poring over a large tome, and the two guards he had lured away. The pair returned only a moment later, and the expected exchange took place. Harry knew not what was said between them. Not being well versed in gobbledygook, but the tension in his shoulders abated as they appeared dismissive of what had occurred. From his position he watched as the lone goblin in the vault went about his work with efficiency, paying no further heed to anything around, so focused on his task he was. When he was certain of the creature's immersion, he carefully made his way towards it, his wand gripped tightly in his hand, poised and ready for one of the riskier parts of his plan. The goblins used magic within the bank, he had seen it himself. He knew not, however, if wards would be triggered by certain spells, but it was a step that simply had to be taken. It was unavoidable. When the musty stench of the goblin became apparent, he aimed his wand but an inch from the neck of the creature and cast a silent, stunning spell, catching the diminutive figure as it collapsed into his arms. Quickly he pulled it within the confines of the cloak and stilled, waiting for any indication his transgression had been detected. All remained quiet, much to his relief, and he quickly withdrew the phial from his pocket. A rather potent version of a potion that would make a person more susceptible to mind magic. He had no doubt that goblins had their own form of occlumency and legislamancy respectively, but again this was something he had no experience of, and wanted to mitigate any disadvantage he may have while confronting this unknown. The potion, as far as he knew, had never been used on anything other than a human. Thus the extra potency. It was unlikely to be fatal, though the goblin could suffer some minor side effects. It was untested territory after all. Removing the cork, he forced open the mouth and administered it, allowing a minute or so to pass to take effect, readying himself to stun the creature once more should his efforts prove to be fruitless. He revived the goblin with a flick of his wand. Bleary eyes greeted him, searching for answers as to what had happened. Before clarity could set in, Harry focused with all he could as he whispered his next spell. Imperio. Bleary eyes became glazed over as the goblin fell under his control with little fight, its senses and willpower ensnared by a combination of the potion and the spell. Breathing a sigh of relief, Harry gave a final cursory glance around to ensure none had become privy to what he was doing before using his mental connection to the creature to convey exactly what he wanted. You will be silent and unmoving. You will comply with all my orders. The goblin nodded mutely, and Harry mounted his broom once more before exiting the vault, at a sedate speed so not to alert those standing guard, the creature seated in front of him. Where is the Lestrange vault? Remaining silent as instructed, the goblin pointed a gnarled finger towards their left and upwards, indicating the vault in question was closer to the surface than that of the blacks. Turning his broom in that direction, Harry navigated his way through the adjoining tunnels, and soon reached a door embossed with the sigil of the family vault he sought. What protections are on it? The goblin began to fight the curse with renewed vigor, but its addled mind was no match for Harry's, who asserted his will with ease once more. Eventually the goblin sagged defeatedly. Mrs. Lestrange ordered the best protections be added during her last visit. Unfortunately, she is not the head of house, and had no such authority to do so. The standard security measures remain in place, and will be null once the vault is open. Only the doubling charm will remain. Harry nodded, satisfied with the answer. The doubling charm was elementary to overcome. He simply needed the goblin to open the vault, and the cup Leo had described would be in his possession. Open it, he whispered, prodding the goblin the back with his wand. The creature ambled forward, his eyes still glazed over. Reaching the door, he pressed his palm on the sigil before running his finger down a groove that appeared below. If any other than a goblin of Gringotts attempted this, the consequences would be dire. Harry had been made aware of the protections on the Black Vault, and he had no doubt the Lestranges would have something similar in place. With a groan, the door opened, revealing a more than modest sum of gold. The family was not exceedingly wealthy by any stretch, but was certainly not impoverished. A few generations could comfortably survive on what was within the vault. Bracing himself, Harry entered the vault, and immediately became aware of a familiar presence, one that had overwhelmed him during his visit to Little Hangleton, with his father and grandfather. It was here, of that he couldn't be more certain. Waving his wand and muttering under his breath, he removed the doubling charm, not concerned that an alarm would be triggered by the action. Bellatrix or any other member of the family would have to do the same to retrieve anything from within. Satisfied that his work had been a success, he pressed forward, the feeling of the Horcrux becoming ever more apparent until his eyes wandered upwards and settled on what most would see as an inane, small cup that had been placed upon the top shelf. With a frown he lowered it gently towards him, rotating it slightly to see what was so special about it. If he had learnt anything about Tom, it was that he would not use something without value to house a part of his soul. His ego was far too big to allow it. Harry's eyes widened slightly as he spied the small badger engraved into base, and his curiosity was sated. A personal creation of one of the Hogwarts founders would be deemed worthy to house such a precious commodity. Indeed, after admiring the cup briefly, he pocketed it, ensuring he recast the doubling charm before taking his leave. There was certainly nothing else within the vault he had any interest in after all. "Close it," he instructed the goblin as he reached him. The creature nodded before setting about the task, pulling the door closed and placing his hand once more on the family sigil which glowed as the vault was sealed. Content that the difficult part of the task was complete, Harry stunned the goblin and placed him back on the front of his broom before returning him to the black vault, avoiding the guards standing vigil with ease. Rolling the goblin off the broom, he cast a basic silencing ward around himself and the creature, not looking forward to the next part of the process. With a shake of his head, he removed a second phial from his pocketed, uncorked it and poured it down the throat of the unconscious goblin, causing it to roll over and purge the contents of its stomach. Only a moment later, when he was satisfied there was nothing else left to be brought up, he focused and removed the imperious goose, before aiming his wand. "Obliviate," he muttered, concentrating on the past 20 minutes. As an addendum he inserted a fake memory of the goblin continuing with his task, and interrupted. If all was well it would shake itself from a stupor and continue where it believed it had left off. Vanishing the vomit with a wave of his wand, he navigated the creature back to where it had been prior, and stood it up, pulling his cloak over himself. He gave a final glance around the vault, to ensure all was where it had been when he arrived. Removing the silencing charm he pointed his wand for a final time, hoping that he had made no errors. "Ep13," he whispered. The goblin startled into consciousness, its formerly glazed eyes alert but marred with a brief second of confusion before it shook its head, seemingly none the wiser to the manipulation it had been subject to. Without preamble he continued with his work and Harry backed out of the vault and mounted his broom before making his escape, the two guards remaining unmoved. He, however, did not allow himself to relax until he reached his entry point, finding his way only through the feel of his own magic he had cast on the illusion. Landing in the tunnel he created, he allowed himself a sigh of relief. His senses having been on high alert for the prolonged period he carried out his subterfuge. Quickly but with care he completed the arduous task of replacing all the stone he had removed, and sealed it all together with a wave of his wand, checking that the wards fell back into place as he had found them. With his work complete, he withdrew the cup that had been the cause of such efforts, and nodded appreciatively. This one he would take to Egypt, where he himself had been relieved of the Horcrux. It would be quite the addition to the many artifacts in the possession of the Blacks once the taint had been removed. Checking for a final time that he had left no trace of his presence, he walked a short distance away from where he had spent the best part of a day and apparated away. Arriving in the foyer of Grimold Place, he allowed himself to feel a sense of triumph. He had done something that no other had. He had successfully broken into the lair of the goblins, liberated an artifact from a vault that did not belong to him, and all without repercussions. Grinning slightly and shaking his head, he traversed the steps and headed towards the drawing room. Entering, he found his father and grandfather sat on opposing sides of the desk, both appearing tired from whatever effort they themselves were making. "What's going on?" Harry questioned the pair, who seemed surprised by his presence. Arcturus released a breath born of frustration. "We are working on a way to retrieve the damned cup. Even the name Black won't do anything to sway the shifty little bastards at Gringotts." Sirius merely shrugged. "And as I have said, you won't know until you try." Giving the game away, Arcturus bit back. "If I make inquiries and nothing comes of it, the finger will be pointed straight at us if we manage to get it in a less than savory way." Harry said nothing as he removed the cup from his pocket and placed it on the table between the two. Arcturus frowned before his eyes widened, his gaze switching between the cup and his grandson. "How?" he asked dumbly. "I found a way in," Harry answered with a smirk. "You broke into Gringotts?" Sirius interjected, his tone a mixture of awe and anger. "You need to explain, Harry," Arcturus insisted. "If you are caught out, it will be the goblin justice you face." Harry nodded his understanding and informed the duo of all he had done to obtain the Horcrux. When he was finished, Arcturus slumped backwards into his chair, his features marred with pride, acceptance and a hint of sadness. "What you have done is unheard of," he whispered. "Go and get yourself cleaned up and we will meet in the kitchen in an hour's time," he announced as he stood from his chair and exited the room. Each decade he had lived showing in the labored steps he took. Harry turned towards his father, confused, and the man offered him a half smile. "I'm furious, Harry, but proud. I don't know whether to clout you or hug you for what you achieved." Settling on the latter, he pulled the teen into a tight embrace. "You're going to make me grey even more if you keep this up." Harry snorted slightly. "I did what I had to for the family." Sirius shook his head as his smile widened. "I know," he clarified, "and so does he," he added, nodding towards the door. The patriarch of the family had left only a moment ago. "Best do as he says. Get yourself cleaned up and meet us down there when you're ready." Harry nodded and took his own leave. Arriving at the room that once belonged to his uncle Regulus, he entered the bathroom and turned on the shower before undressing and entering. For several minutes he allowed the hot water to wash over him and ease his aching muscles, as he pondered just what he had done. It could have easily proven to be reckless, had he not been so fortunate in his endeavor. Had he been caught and unable to escape, the goblins would likely have killed him. Not that he would have gone down without a fight. Doing so, however, would likely be folly. He had proven he was no slouch with a wand, but taking on the entirety of the goblins was not smart. Wizards weren't wary of the creatures for nothing. Once he had finished washing, he turned off the water and dried himself off with a wave of his wand. Feeling considerably better, he returned to the bedroom and dressed, bracing himself for an important discussion with the rest of his family. Leo would have his back without question. Cassie was likely to curse him, as she always attempted to do whenever he did something foolish, and his father would likely rant and rave once the realization had settled in. The unknown in the situation was his grandfather. One could never be certain how the man would react. Either his anger would prevail, or his anger would get the better of him. Deciding he had delayed the inevitable long enough, he left his room and headed towards the kitchen, the rest of the house ominously silent, as though it too was awaiting the outcome. Should his grandfather choose to, his life could become rather more complicated than it already was. He could only hope the man saw the sense in his actions, despite having not shared his intentions with the rest. Bracing himself, he entered the kitchen only to be surprised by the group waiting within for him to arrive. His grandfather was seated at the head of the table, as expected. His father, Aunt Cassie and Leo were there, also sat in their usual seats. The surprise, however, was the presence of all three of the Tonks family, the elder two decidedly uncomfortable and the younger looking at him with something akin to guilt marring her features. He had not seen her in the 2 days since Charlie had been buried. She had sent a Petronus informing him something had come up, but had gone into no further detail. It was partly this obscure message that had spurred him into solving the Gringotts problem quicker than expected. Arcturus said nothing at first, but gestured for him to take a seat. Where Harry would usually be on his left as his heir, he was instructed to sit at the furthest chair away from the man. He complied with a nod before sitting, the expression worn by his lord blank. Arcturus cleared his throat as he stood, withdrew the cup Harry had retrieved from Gringotts and placed it on the table. "I have gathered you all here to bear witness to my decision regarding the events of today," he began, his voice giving nothing of his feelings away. "Never in all my years would I expect a member of this family to carry out such a deed, nor be successful in such an endeavor." A look of recognition and shock overcame Leo as he stared between the cup and Harry. Cassie appeared to be as clueless as the Tonks, and Sirius remained grim in his demeanor. Arcturus continued with a sigh before any could speak whatever thoughts they may be having. "I have done all I can to be a good lord of this family, one that allowed every member many freedoms. For the most part I have been a failure," he declared, his head hanging. Harry felt a wave of sadness wash over him at the words of the man that had mentored him these past years. Arcturus, however, held up a hand to quell any outcry. His eyes met Harry's, and the teen could see the tiredness that plagued the man. To him, he had always been invincible, stronger than any he had ever met, and a man he aspired to be. Now in this moment, Arcturus Black was an old man who had lived many difficult years trying to hold the fraying threads of his family together. Perhaps I should have done things differently. But even the Lord Black cannot change the past, nor in many cases atone for it, he added, his gaze shifting to Andromeda. But I did the best I could. Had I done things differently, it is unlikely I would be stood in the fortunate position I am in now. He released a deep breath as he nodded resolutely. I will certainly not go down as one of the best this family has ever borne. But the sign of a good lord is knowing when there is a better to take his place, knowing when the time is right for him to step down. He beckoned for Harry to approach, and the teen did so slowly, not waiting to believe what was happening. This past year, Harry, you have proven to be my better in many ways. Both your mind and wand are sharper than my own, and it is now time for you to take the mantle of Lord Black. No, Harry denied firmly, causing Arcturus to smile and grab his hand in a gentle grasp. I'm a very old man, Harry. I am tired and not what I once was. Each day, I grow more tired, more frail and less sound of mind. I named you my heir for a reason, because I saw a greatness in you that I never possessed. I saw in you the lord that could return our family to its former glory. You're ready, my heir. I know the family will thrive under your headship. Harry swallowed the lump that had formed in his throat, accepting the words of the man without further question. Arcturus Black was not one to give such praise so freely. What will you do? He asked, worriedly. I'll be here to help you when you need it. I imagine I'll be long gone before the day comes you no longer do. A sense of relief came over Harry. For a moment he thought the older man may disappear from his life. He would rather never be the Lord Black than lose his grandfather. What do you say, Harry? Are you ready? The teen snorted as he shook his head. I don't think I'll ever be. Arcturus leaned forward as a grin tugged at his lips. You never do, he whispered, eliciting a laugh from his heir. Glancing around the room, he saw a mixture of sadness and pride staring back at him from Cassie, Sirius and Leo. Even Andromeda gave him a smile of approval whilst Tonks fidgeted uncomfortably. Turning back to his grandfather, he gave him a nod, unable to vocalize just what it was he was feeling. A rare, genuine smile formed on the older man's lips as he removed the family ring from his index and did the same to the one on Harry's that signified him as the heir. The Lord's ring was heavier, though Harry couldn't be sure whether that was the responsibility that came with it weighing it down or the fact that it was slightly larger than the one he had worn for so long. Regardless, it was the most warm he had ever felt, as though the old man had stood from his chair and wrapped his arms around him. That, he knew, would never happen. Arcturus did, however, grab him tightly by the shoulder, a gesture that spoke more words than a tongue ever could in that moment. I name you Harry Arcturus Black, the new lord of our family, the old man declared. This time Harry could not entirely contain his emotion as his eyes filled with tears. For as long as he cared to remember, he had been Harry Black, adopted son of Sirius and nothing more. He had not been gifted with a black name, and until now it had never been something he had truly missed. Receiving the honor of being given the name of the man in front of him was more humbling than he could have ever imagined. He would carry the name with pride, would prove he was worthy of such a thing. As overwhelmed as he felt, he could only bow in gratitude. Who will be my heir? He questioned as he held the ring that had been his for so long. Arcturus looked almost guilty as he considered his answer, though not apologetic. That is something I will allow Andromeda, her husband and Nymphadora, to explain. Do not be worried, Harry. You are not being forced into anything. Harry turned away from his grandfather nervously, his gaze meeting that of the metamorph, who returned it in an equal state. He approached her and her parents, worried that something had been done that would interfere with what himself and the girl had been building these past months since they had met. "Watcher Harry," Tonks greeted him, an uncertain smile gracing her lips. "I suppose I should be asking, what is going on?" he returned. Tonks nodded and looked around the room. Getting the hint, Harry led her away. the two being followed by her parents. He entered the adjoining parlor room and the trio took a seat on one of the plush sofas as Harry sat in a single chair by the fire. "I suppose I should start," Andromeda decided after a moment of silence, her daughter nodding gratefully. Break. Flashback. Andromeda Tonks was pottering around the kitchen in what she had once considered her second home. The memories here were bittersweet at best, the sweetness soured by the events that came later in life. She had been fond of Bellatrix, her younger, vivacious sister. She had been the envy of most, beautiful and talented, the latter being used to carry out evil deeds rather than for betterment. To say Andromeda had been surprised by her decision to align herself with the Dark Lord would be an understatement. Bellatrix had never been one to follow. She herself had once been larger than life, her ego allowing none to bring her to heel. Even her father had trouble in such efforts. Bellatrix answered to none. Alas, there had been something about Voldemort that had lured her in. Power, perhaps, whatever it was, had enthralled the young woman, and she had become the one thing Andromeda never thought she would, a sycophant. The youngest of the trio had been the freest. Narcissa had been born different to the others, favoring blonde locks instead of the classic black of the blacks. Her own beauty because of it had always been somewhat ethereal, almost otherworldly. The rumors had been that she was not at all a black but the product of a tryst between her father and Avila. Nonsense, of course. Her father may have been many things, but he was as loyal and dedicated to her mother than any. Even Avila would have been unable to turn his head. Sissy had been gifted with warmth, hard to believe considering the cold, aloof woman she had grown into. But it had been her that brought the laughter and the smiles to her older sisters. A mischievous grin often adorning her features as her grey eyes were alight with much the same. To see her marry Lucius Malfoy of all people had been a real blow. What the woman had become was the opposite of what the girl had been. Andromeda still missed them, the two girls she had grown with, despite who they now were and what they had done. Bella could never be forgiven for her actions, and Narcissa would not give her the time of day. The moment she decided she would marry Ted, she said goodbye to her family knowing there was no going back. She regretted nothing, however. Her sisters had made their choices long before she, and it was her that ended up the better. She was not as wealthy as Narcissa, but she had more than she could ever want in her husband and daughter, the two most important people in her life. She was pulled from her musings by the sound of the flue, something she never expected to hear whilst within the house. Harry had assured them it was not possible for any to visit, and he came and went as he pleased. Drawing her wand with a frown, she noted it was getting late in the evening. Whomever it was had no respect for social decorum. Evidently, opening the door to the room that contained the only working fireplace, her eyes widened at the head floating within the flames, the head of a man she'd had no conversation with since before her father had cast her out of the family. She swallowed the hint of anger and sadness at his appearance, and curtsied as had been drilled into her from since she was a girl. "Lord Black," she greeted the man cautiously. He was much older than she remembered, his greying hair now entirely devoid of the black it had once been. The lines in his face were deep, so much so that were it not for the sharp eyes scrutinizing her, he would have been almost unrecognizable. "Andromeda," Arcturus returned with a nod. "I would like to request a meeting with yourself and your husband when the time is convenient." Her stomach became a pit of nervousness at his words, and it took a moment for her to compose herself sufficiently that she could reply. "Has something happened?" "Nothing of the sort," her grandfather assured her. "I do believe, however, that a talk is in need. Recent events have prompted such a thing." Andromeda swallowed as she nodded. She'd somewhat been expecting this for some time, ever since Nymphadora had been spending time with Harry. She doubted the Black Patriarch would have been pleased by the development, and now it seemed he was acting upon his displeasure. "You can come through now if it is convenient for yourself," she sighed. It would likely do no good for him to attempt to interfere. What she knew of Harry and her daughter was that they were similarly stubborn to a fault. She could have hoped that Harry could either convince the older man to allow their association to continue, or her daughter would see sense and not provoke the head of the family into taking steps to ensure his wishes were met. She would of course do all she could to protect her daughter, for all the good it would do. "Thank you. I shall join you in a moment." As his head disappeared, Andromeda rushed from the room to locate her husband. As expected, she found him perusing a book in front of the fire in the main lounge, and she snatched it from him, eliciting a yelp of surprise from the man. "My grandfather is coming here. Here wants to speak with both of us." "Now?" Ted asked with a frown. "Yes, now." Andromeda bit back, rushing away to greet the Lord Black as he arrived, straightening her robes as she went. Ted entered the room just as the fireplace flared into life and the man himself stepped out of the green flames, clearing away the errant ash with a casual wave of his wand. Again Andromeda curtsied out of respect, and Ted followed with a clumsy bow that Arcturus ignored. "There is no need for the formality. It is I that is imposing on you," he insisted. The couple relaxed somewhat at his words. "Can I get you something to drink?" Andromeda offered. Arcturus nodded thoughtfully. "A glass of that fine wine your mother used to keep would be most welcome," the older man answered almost reverently. Andromeda flushed red in embarrassment. "I was never allowed the password to the cellar," she explained. Arcturus chuckled, shocking the woman. For someone who seemingly wanted to discuss something so serious, he was in rather good spirits. "Of course," he concurred. "Harry would not have been able to tell you, as I did not inform of it. The last time Leo and he got into one of the cellars, I ended up with a worse headache than the pair of them." He mused aloud, shaking his head as he exited the room and entered the kitchen with the 2 tonks in tow. "It is a rather simple spell. You just have to point your wand at the floor here and cartouches." A set of descending stairs appeared in the floor, and Arcturus nodded in satisfaction as he summoned a bottle from within the opening, with a flick of his wand. "Allow me," Andromeda offered, reaching for the bottle. "I may be an old man, but no so old that I cannot pour a drink," he replied as he conjured 3 glasses and set them on the table. The cork released from the bottle with a gentle pop, and Arcturus poured each a generous measure. "My apologies," Andromeda mumbled. "Think nothing of it," Arcturus dismissed. "It should be me apologizing. For all intents and purposes, this is your home and it is I that am overstepping. Maybe we should just sit down," Ted interjected, unfazed by the penetrating gaze of their visitor. Arcturus nodded and followed the lead of the pair. Once he was seated, an uncomfortable silence fell over the trio that was eventually broken by Andromeda. "What is it you wish to discuss?" Arcturus took a sip from his glass and placed it back on the table. "Your daughter," he answered simply. Andromeda sighed. "If you no longer wish her to spend time with Harry, that is a conversation you will have to have with them. She would not listen to us even if I was inclined to convince her," she returned firmly. Arcturus snorted slightly at the retort, pleased that the woman had not lost all the traits she had acquired from his line. "You mistake my intentions, Andromeda," he returned. "I very much approve of Nymphadora. I could give you no greater compliment than to say that you have both raised a fine young woman." Andromeda raised an eyebrow in disbelief. She had not expected such a compliment from the man. "So, what is it you do want?" Ted questioned with a frown. "I would like to begin negotiations for a marriage contract between Nymphadora and Harry." "Absolutely not," Andromeda answered immediately. "I will not even attempt to force my daughter into a marriage. And I would not do the same to Harry. Merlin knows the boy would sooner give up his heirship than be forced into marriage. I am merely asking you to hear the terms of my proposal. I'm sure you will understand and be agreeable to them." Before Andromeda could respond, Ted placed a hand on her forearm to prevent an angry outburst. Meeting the eye of her husband, she visibly deflated and nodded, gesturing for her grandfather to continue. "Since we have arrived in Britain, I have received no less than 18 offers of marriage for Harry," he began, the news not surprising the woman. Being married to the future Lord Black would be a boon for any family with ambitions. As I have already said, Harry would sooner flee than be coerced into such. However, something must be done. Many of the families offering their daughters are exceedingly important. The dowries not small in sum. Were I a younger, less experienced man, one of few would already have been accepted. "But you haven't?" Andromeda pressed. Arcturus shook his head. "Were it not for your daughter, I would have advised Harry to consider them," he admitted. "Nymphadora, however, makes that impossible. The boy is smitten with her." "Is he in love with her?" I do not know, but I believe the pair should be given the chance to find out for themselves." Andromeda and Ted both nodded their agreement. "She is more fond of him than she has ever been of anyone," Andromeda sighed. "She cares for him, and I don't think even she knows how much." "Those are my thoughts exactly," Arcturus agreed. "So what is your proposal?" Arcturus took a moment to collect his thoughts, not wanting to be dismissed out of hand. "I would propose a contract that Nymphadora herself would sign, that within 2 years, herself and Harry must decide if they are to be wed. If no such thing happens, then Harry will need to find a suitable bride to continue the family line. If they decide to do so, it will be done with my utmost blessing and happiness." Andromeda's eyes widened at the simplistic explanation. For the lord of a family to allow such a grace period was unheard of. He truly must be fond of both Harry and Dora to allow such a thing. No other lord she could think of would be so considerate, nor generous. However, there was more to this other than such generosity. "Why are you trying to push them into this?" "It is not about pushing them," Arcturus denied. "It is about security for the family. One day soon, next week, next month, or perhaps next year, I will no longer be the Lord Black. I need to ensure that the family is in a position to prosper." Andromeda nodded her understanding. When her grandfather stepped down, or died, it would be expected of Harry marry soon after taking up the headship. The family would be viewed as weak and vulnerable with a head that would bear no children soon. What the proposal offered was nothing more nor less than Nymphadora to find the happiness she deserved. At best she would be married to person she loved. At worst she would realize that it is not Harry she wishes to spend her life with. "That's it? There's nothing else to it?" Arcturus shook his head. "If they do decide to marry, then we can discuss the details." Andromeda nodded her understanding. "We will have to discuss it with Nymphadora," she insisted. "Of course," Arcturus agreed. "I would have expected nothing less. And what if she refuses to agree? Then I will suggest that Harry considers the other offers I have received." Arcturus answered honestly, "I am convinced that it will be sooner rather than later that I will no longer be the best man to lead this family." Andromeda knew not what to say to the man who was looking every decade he had lived. She could only watch as he bowed and left the room, exiting through the flues. Only a moment later. "We should discuss this with Dora as soon as we can," Ted suggested. "It can wait until after the funeral," Andromeda replied. "They are burying poor Charlie tomorrow and Harry will need her." Ted nodded grimly. The story of the boy who lived and how he was murdered still fresh in his memory. End flashback. Break. Harry dragged a hand through his hair, irritated but understanding of why his grandfather had taken such a step. He would have done something similar were he in the same precarious position as head of the family. Arcturus had done what he always had, what was necessary to ensure the continuation of the Black line. No Black in recent history had led the family when so few were still around. There were few possibilities to inherit, so few were the numbers remaining. "And you're okay with this?" he questioned the metamorph. Tonks shrugged. "I was angry until Mum explained," she answered candidly. "I wasn't raised with all the pure-blood formalities, so didn't understand how much a big deal all this was. The fact that Lord Black even offered what he has will be an insult to many families." Andromeda nodded her agreement. "And there is no real pressure on either of you. If you decide within the 2 years you want to marry, then so be it. You'll at the very least know if it is or isn't what you both want." Harry sighed and nodded. He didn't want the pressure, but the deal struck seemed fair. It would keep other families at bay for the time being also. "He did this for both of you, to give you the chance," Andromeda soothed. "In his position it was more than he should have done. He could have insisted on you marrying sooner or offered you up to another before making you the new lord," she pointed out. "He could have," Harry agreed. "So what do we do from here?" "We don't have to do anything yet," Tonks answered with a shrug. "Maybe you should look at the contract offers. Being the lord of such an important family, it will be expected that you consider them." Again Andromeda nodded her agreement, giving her daughter's arm a gentle squeeze. Harry frowned as he shook his head. "I'm not interested," he dismissed harshly. "I'm not going to marry anyone else because it is expected of me. I will marry who I choose, and anyone who doesn't like it can take it up with me." he finished, his eyes flaring the eerie emerald of his anger. The Tonks were taken aback by the impromptu impassioned speech, and Andromeda grinned appreciatively. She had not seen this side to Harry, but he was undoubtedly raised a black. Even Sirius, who did all he could to distance himself from them as a boy, could never erase the traits that made him who he was. The black in people prevailed, against all odds. "We have 2 years to decide," he continued calmly. "We don't have to make any decisions now." Tonks nodded her agreement, relieved he was so against exploring other options. "Any idea why you were made Lord Black so suddenly?" Ted asked curiously. Harry rubbed the back of his neck in discomfort. "I might have broken into Gringotts and took something from a vault that does not belong to the family," he answered almost sheepishly.
"You did what?"
Ted yelped. Tonks' lips formed into a thin line before she burst into laughter, her mother staring at the young man in disbelief. "There was something I needed, and it wasn't like the little shits would hand it over," he defended. "It's not funny, Dora," Ted chastised. "He could have been killed." Tonks managed to control herself as she shook in amusement. "Why am I not surprised?" she huffed. "You probably would have done it just to prove you could." "Don't deny it," she added, quelling any protest. "I know you better than you think, Harry." Harry could only shrug. He'd never had ambition to break into the bank before, but he could not deny that had such a thought surfaced, he wouldn't be tempted by the task. "Stupid boy," Andromeda muttered. "Not my best idea," Harry returned, "but it was necessary and I managed it without being caught." How Ted stuttered, still in shock. "They have some of the best security in the world. It's just a Harry thing." Tonks sighed. Harry could only shrug in agreement. He had developed a knack for doing things most believed impossible. His ability to manipulate magic the way he did was proof. "So you're really not going to consider the other offers?" Andromeda asked after a moment of silence. Harry shook his head. "If after 2 years Dora decides she doesn't want to marry me, then and only then we'll think about it." "Or if you decide you don't want to marry me," Tonks interjected. "True," Harry answered with a smirk, causing the girl to narrow her eyes at him. "And just what is wrong with me?" Harry's grin widened. "You're clumsy. Your charms work is horrendous. You make me eat ice cream until I am sick and snore." Really loudly he reeled off, his eyes alight with mirth. "Well, you have an ego, you're unsociable. You burn things and you wake up so early that even the bloody birds aren't up." Andromeda and Ted watched the back and forth between the two in amusement until the former decided to intervene. "Merlin, you're both as stubborn as each other," she sighed. "And immature," she added when her daughter stuck her tongue out at Harry, who gave a less pleasant gesture with his finger. The two laughed as Andromeda shook her head, looking towards her own husband for help. Ted could only shrug, evidently entertained by the duo. "You are supposed to be an Oru, and you the Lord Black," Andromeda pointed out to the pair. "Speaking of which," Ted interjected before either his daughter or Harry could come up with a reply that would not doubt provoke the ire of his wife, "what will you do now that you've been given the headship?" Harry sobered at the reminder of his new responsibilities as he pondered where to begin. "Well, Grandfather has plans for the minister position that I will see through, and I can't think of a better way to announce my ascension to Tom by sitting amongst his followers," he finished with a smirk, his eyes briefly flaring emerald. "The other lords will not take it well that you are the new Lord Black, because of your age," Andromeda explained. "They will try to manipulate and take advantage of you or dismiss you outright." Harry chuckled darkly. "If anyone is so stupid to try, it will end badly for them," he promised. "They are beneath me, and I will remind them of that, if necessary." Andromeda was not truly surprised by his response. He had been raised and taught by Ep13 Black. He too had been young when he took the mantle of head of house, and those that thought they could take liberties with him had seen the error of their ways very quickly. Harry, if anything, was very much like her grandfather, but didn't. Where Arcturus could cause harm, he could often be more thoughtful, more cunning in his vengeance. Harry, however, seemed to favor the less tactful approach when dealing with enemies, and the woman could see why there were very few that could hope to stand against him if he drew his wand. Much of the wizarding world would have seen his fight with the Dark Lord in the graveyard by now, and most would be reluctant at best to engage the new lord in such a way. The coming weeks and months would certainly be interesting. The Blacks had traditionally been darker in political ideology, but with Harry having so many enemies that could usually be counted upon as allies, it was anyone's guess just what he would do, and as she looked into his calculating eyes, she could see his mind working, pondering just that. Standing amongst the portraits of those that had come before him, Harry took in his reflection in the mirror that was placed in the corner of the room and nodded contentedly. He couldn't help but compare himself to the men surrounding him. The finery of the robes, the trademark black hair and the eyes in various shades of grey. None could say he looked out of place. A black down to the finest detail. Arcturus had insisted he make use of the Lord's solar, a place the man himself had seldom used. It was resplendent, a physical statement of the wealth and station of the family, somewhere that once had been used to host other important lords, though hadn't been in many years. Arcturus had become a recluse and the room had been left to simply gather dust. Harry had restored it to its former glory, ready for when the need arose to use it. Today was such a day. He was not welcoming any into the home, but he would be taking advantage of one of the benefits that came with being a lord of the land. He would be using the fireplace to attend his first Wizengamot meeting, to announce his inheritance of the title bestowed upon him. It was unlikely that many would be pleased by the news, particularly those that spent much of their lives on their hands and knees, prostrating themselves before a megalomaniac. Harry found himself relishing the thought of the surprise and outcry at his appearance in the hallowed chambers, if only to silence those beneath him the way he had been taught. Checking his watch, he gave himself a final once-over in the mirror before heading towards the fireplace. Throwing a handful of flue powder into the flames, they flared a bright green as he cleared his throat. "Wizengamot chambers," he called loudly, and stepped in. As a rule, he never traveled using this method if it could be avoided. As far back as he could remember, he'd had difficulties traveling through the network. His expulsion on the other side tended to be violent, to say the least. Over the years before he had been granted his apparition license, he had managed to control it better, but it would never be a preference. He would sooner fly across the globe than travel by flue. He stumbled slightly as he was ejected into the chambers so full that his appearance went completely unnoticed. The room could only have been at capacity, every seat in the public gallery filled by members of the press, and public luckily enough to bear witness to the spectacle of a new or permanent minister being installed. Still, Harry's presence was not noted until he had cleared half the floor between the fireplace and the seat his family had occupied for centuries. The first to take heed of his arrival was the chief warlock, whose wide eyes greeted him until he composed himself with a bow in his direction. Harry returned the gesture respectfully. As was expected, it was an empty gesture on his part, finding it difficult to muster anything that resembled respect for the man that had been the cause of much of his misfortune. Dumbledore, however, was not important today. His focus was on the man that was milling around the other members of the lighter-aligned political families. James Potter cut a fine figure, a stern visage and robes almost as red as blood. He stood the epitome of what a minister should look like, completely contrary to the pot-bellied buffoon that had come before him. Regardless of the mixed feelings towards the man, he could think of no one more primed or with better reason for wanting the position. Paying no mind further to James, he approached his seat on the very front row amongst those of the darker families. Fighting the urge to grin at the reaction he was given, he sat in his chair, shunning the likes of Malfoy, who had stiffened next to him, and Nott, who had begun fidgeting in his seat on the opposite side. "Should any of you get the impulse to draw your wand, I will fucking end you where you stand," Harry hissed. "It would be quite a shame having to resort drawing blood on my first visit here." "You dare, boy," a voice challenged him from behind. "Tut, thickness. Haven't you heard? Your lot are dropping like flies at the moment. You wouldn't want to potentially provoke the wrong person, would you? Better yet, why not ask the man whose ass you've got your tongue rammed up? What happened the last time he tried to cross me? The Dark Lord will come for you, boy," Thickness whispered furiously. Malfoy attempted to chastise him with a look, but Harry chuckled, provoking the man further. "When you see the coward, tell him it is I that is coming for him. Tell him that I will take the lives of all of those that carry his mark, and then I will personally rip out his heart once I have finished taking what he owes me in blood and suffering." Be a good boy, Pius, and pass on that message. I'm sure he will be pleased to know that. You fucking whelp. Thickness hissed as he stood before he was shoved back into his chair by an unusually silent Lucius Malfoy. Or, Lucius, you should have allowed him to do as he wishes. It could have been another name off my list. Harry sighed, his eyes flaring excitedly as he turned his head and gazed into the blue of the man. Pleased at the nervous swallow he elicited, he turned his attention to Dumbledore, who was watching him over his half-moon spectacles speculatively. The Dark Lord is beyond you, Black. You could never hope to compare to his power, Lucius returned. You and your family will meet their end by his hands. Harry narrowed his eyes at the man. Not before yours, Lucius. Not before yours. Dumbledore crashed his gavel against the podium, cutting off any rebuttal the blonde may have had to Harry's final words, the room falling silent in anticipation for what was to come. Before we indulge ourselves in the momentous occasion before us, I believe that it is prudent for us to acknowledge a new face amongst us. Therefore I would like to welcome and congratulate Lord Harry Black on his ascension to lordship of his most revered family. Evidently very few had noticed his presence, and a considerable amount of whispering broke out at the announcement, many standing and craning their necks to get a better view of the young man. What happened to Arcturus? Is the former lord well? Several questions were called out of turn, and Harry stood and held up his hands to silence what seemed to be mostly journalists making the inquiries. I can assure you my grandfather is in fine health and spirit. He feels that now is the time for him to step away from the political field, so that he can enjoy his remaining years without the necessity of pandering to fools and the unfortunate dregs of society that have found themselves in their lofty positions. His words, not mine, he added, with a shrug. A murmur of outrage could be heard, but there were few willing to voice their displeasure so loudly towards the Blacks, especially with one so close by. Happy that his reason for being here had been given and accepted, Harry took his seat once more, enjoying the discomfort of those around him. He had no doubt that the moment this meeting ended, several within earshot would be on their knees before Tom, crying about the way he had spoken to them. He fought the urge to smirk again as the image of Malfoy being cursed by his master swam across his mind. It would not do to focus on the sight, no matter how entertaining, not when he had something with such import to see through. I am pleased that the former Lord Black is well, Dumbledore replied with a nod. Now I would like to welcome you all to this most necessary of gatherings. It is here today that we will decide whom will become our next Minister of Magic. A smattering of whispers broke out and continued to speculate until Dumbledore once more called for silence with another crash of his gavel. Harry couldn't help but feel it would see much use this day if it continued in the same vein. Firstly, we must acknowledge nominations for the position. From there each accepted nominee will give a brief speech and our votes shall be cast. If we are unable to reach a majority consensus, the candidates will be whittled down until only 2 remain. The person that receives the most votes will be named our new Minister of Magic. Who would like to begin? Several wands were raised. The tips lit up to garner the attention of the man carrying out the proceedings. Lord Doge Dumbledore called upon first. The room fell silent as Elphius Doge stood with difficulty. He was an old man, likely one of the oldest within the chamber, and it appeared that even a gentle breeze could knock him off his feet. My thoughts are as they always have been, even more so in the face of the threat we face. I believe no other should take the position, other than Albus Dumbledore himself, he wheezed. Another muttering broke out at Doge's declaration, some in agreement, others spouting expletives the contrary of his thoughts. Harry could only shake his head as Dumbledore used his gavel to garner the attention of the room. As always, I appreciate the faith you show in me, old friend. However, my reply is the same as it has always been. I am an educator, and have no desire to take office away from the school. Hogwarts is now and always my first priority. Most nodded appreciatively at the statement. Despite feelings certain people had towards him, it was undeniable that he was dedicated to the school first and foremost. Harry acknowledged his abstention with a nod, knowing his task would have been made inexplicably more difficult had the nomination been accepted. Lord Bowl, Dumbledore prompted. A man much younger than Doge bowed before he released a deep breath. The times we face are certainly dire. he began diplomatically. As such, we need a man of action, one that has not shied away from the threat of the Dark Lord. Thus far, that man has been Rufus Scrimger. It is he that has taken the helm since Fudge fled. It is he that I look to lead us through these perilous times. Several people murmured their agreement, and Rufus stood amongst his own supporters, grinning smugly. I humbly accept the nomination, he announced, receiving a round of applause and cheering from those around him. Harry snorted. There was nothing humble in the demeanor of the man who was preening under the attention of those within the room. Lord Potter, Dumbledore called. James stood, his visage almost blank as his gaze swept across those gathered. There was purpose in his posture as he exuded confidence without a hint of the cockiness he was once known for. To Harry he cut quite the imposing figure. I have already announced my intentions of running for office, and here I stand to reiterate it. Voldemort is a plague on our society and has been a burden on my family. I stand before you ensuring you that should you name me your new minister, I will do whatever it takes to see the end of the monster. I will provide our law enforcement with all they need to carry out their duties in the safest way possible, and I will break those that side with him, either by imprisoning them or eradicating them all if necessary. Many looks of shock adorned the features of the gathered lords and ladies of the land, surprised that one would be so candid in their intentions, particularly when there was no reticence nor mincing of words. James Potter had made his point and had done so emphatically. That is murder, an irate voice screamed. And what would you call what Voldemort and his Death Eaters are doing? Harry replied loudly. Turning to face the man, he took in the appearance of a face that seemed to have been struck repeatedly with a frying pan. So flat his nose was. I suppose you would call it a cleansing. The man reddened in fury as he trembled. I for one am very interested in what the new Lord Black has to say on the matter, Scrimger goaded from across the room. Humoring the man, Harry stood from his seat and all eyes turned to him, many skeptical, others curious to hear his first public address within the chamber. Well, first of all, Scrimgeour, I would reconsider the tone you just addressed me with, or I will personally remind as to why the Blacks stand head and shoulder above yourself and your ilk. This time only, I will put it down to the emotion of the occasion, and a simple apology will suffice. Should you choose not to, securing your position will be the least of your worries, he finished with a furious hiss, his hands itching to reach for his wand. Scrimgeour paled at the threat and laughed awkwardly as the silent room stared between the two, watching with bated breath for the outcome of the standoff. Come now, Black, surely your skin is thick enough to absorb a jest, Rufus tried. Harry's eyes glowed eerily as he shook his head. Does it appear to you that I am jesting? He questioned in just above a whisper. Rufus, apologized to Lord Black, Amelia Bones encouraged, her own wand in hand to head off any unpleasantness. Scrimgeour shook his head before bowing slightly. My apologies, Lord Black, he offered quietly. Harry grinned malevolently at the current minister before nodding his acceptance and turning his head away from the man dismissively. As to my thoughts on the matter as to whom should lead our country, he spoke once more to those gathered. I believe we should learn from history from the past mistakes made. He allowed the smattering of mutters to abate before continuing. Up until Voldemort's visit to my brother, the night he fell for the first time, Britain was on the verge of losing the war. There is no debate to be had on the matter. The country had been brought to its knees. The Death Eaters were wreaking havoc up and down the country, and little was being done to prevent it. Weak leadership and lack of action was the cause of this. Unless you want a repeat of the last war, things need to be different. There can be no hesitation nor mercy when dealing with Voldemort and those that follow him. The Aurors should not have to risk their lives attempting to bring them in. These animals, so happy to hunt and murder Muggles, and those of our kind should not be granted such treatment. They should face equal force, should be slaughtered for their transgressions against Wizarding Britain. Drastic times call for drastic measures, and I would recommend implementing such as quickly as possible. If you do not, many lives will be lost. Our loved ones will fall victim to tyranny and Voldemort will win. Silence met his words, many people becoming contemplative, others shocked by the impassioned speech. We cannot allow this, the same flat-featured man shouted almost hysterically at Harry's suggestion. He is inciting civil war. It is Voldemort that has incited war, you moron, Harry returned, and I wasn't finished. That will not be enough. What else is it you suggest, Lord Black? Dumbledore questioned. Any and all that carry the dark mark, willingly or unwillingly, he added with a sigh, should be excluded from being nominated as minister. Those surrounding and behind him erupted in a cacophony of jeers and retorts, furious at such a suggestion. We did not act of our own will. We were cleared by the previous minister, one protested loudly over the din. Then you should be doubly excluded for being weak-minded. If you were, as you claim, under the imperious curse, you have proven yourself unfit for office. What is to prevent it from happening again? Almost all the lords on the opposing side nodded and vocalized their agreement, and Harry noticed Dumbledore's beard twitching slightly, almost as though he was enjoying himself or simply relishing that Harry was raising very salient points most others would dare not do. This is an outrage and it will not stand, an older man to his left growled. Well, if in your position, Lord whoever you are, you do not wish to mitigate the harm Voldemort could have on the country with a weak leader installed, I would certainly be questioning your loyalty to the great nation in which you claim to serve and protect. Maybe you yourself are in fact a sympathizer of his extreme cause. The man gaped, unable to respond without implicating himself as one who at the very least supported Tom. That goes for all of you here. If you are so inclined to put forth a candidate with a questionable alliance or already proven weak of mind, what does that say of your own loyalty to your country? Harry finished. None had a response to his words, falling into the same trap the first fool to protest had. Many lords, ladies and journalists seemed to be scrutinizing the teen who had seemingly quelled any notion of a Dark Lord sympathizer being elected in one fell swoop. Those within the same stand fell silent, not wishing to draw any undue attention to themselves. All right, Black, you've made a very compelling point. Whom would you suggest we elect? Tiberius Ogden questioned from his position next to Dumbledore. Harry bowed respectfully at the question, pondering his answer before speaking once more. Out of the two put forward, Ogden nodded, and Harry released a deep breath. Thus far under Scrimgeour's tenure, short as it has been, Azkaban has fallen, attacks on muggles and wizards are increasing weekly and not a single arrest has been made. The public live in fear, scared to leave their homes because they have no faith in those that are sworn to protect them. The Aurors are almost powerless to prevent these attacks, nor respond to them quickly enough to help those targeted. Rufus Scrimgeour has done nothing to change that. He has spent his time in office, parading around like a prized cock without a damn clue. What about your father? Ogden pressed. Sirius Black is my father. It is he that has raised me from when I was a boy. Harry returned firmly. James Potter did not raise me. I was shunned by those that birthed me to protect my younger brother. I never once saw James nor Lily Potter, until I returned for the tournament in October last year. Though you are all aware of that, the Daily Prophet dined out on my misery for months. My apologies, Lord Black, Ogden offered sincerely. I was aware. I wasn't sure if you had made peace with one another. It is clear that is not the case. I had to be certain your apparent animosity was not being used as a ploy to deceive us. Harry nodded his understanding, the bitterness he still held for the man and his wife sincere and convincing enough to pass off as genuine disdain. My personal feelings aside, I can honestly think of no other than James Potter, who could be so trusted to do all he could to put an end to Voldemort. None could ever question his motivation nor his allegiance. He has suffered the most, lost his family to the Dark Lord. You may not agree with him, but he will do what is necessary and needed to ensure Britain comes through this with minimal hurt and casualties. You would truly advocate me being minister? James asked, his saddened eyes tugging at Harry's heartstrings. The teen nodded. For the good of the country I would, he answered. I can never forgive you for what you did to me. But Charlie deserves his justice, and I believe that you will do what is best to ensure it is served. James swallowed deeply, ignoring all the eyes on himself and Harry. Everyone deserves justice. Everyone that has lost someone to Voldemort and they all should have their justice and not live in fear that they could be next. Silence followed James's reply. No lord or lady able to offer a suitable retort. Before we begin the process of casting our votes, Are there any other nominees? Dumbledore questioned. The silence continued within the chambers, those that may have been willing to nominate another seemingly no longer in such spirit. Very well. Would either of the two candidates like to take the final opportunity to address the room? Scrimgeour stood immediately, his arms wide open. What is it? I need to say to prove my dedication to putting an end to the Dark Lord, he questioned, almost frantically. What more could I have done upon taking office? The DMLE have been given additional funding. They are working tirelessly to put an end to this. Words are water, Scrimgeour, Harry returned evenly. Your first move should have been to bring in all known carriers of the Dark Mark and question the Under Veritarum. If they are indeed innocent, such a thing would not have been an imposition on them, merely to prove they are not in league with or assisting Voldemort. Of course, movements of discomfort from around him could be heard, though tongues were held. Scrimgeour shook his head. Impossible, he denied. No, it isn't, Harry rebuked. As the Minister of Magic, you have the power to subject any citizen to such measures if deemed necessary by yourself and the head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. The potion should be administered by a neutral party, and questioning carried out by the head of the DMLE, witnessed by no less than 4 other heads of department and the chief warlock of the Wizengamot. Scrimgeour stared back at him dumbly whilst others began to whisper furiously. Is that true? He asked Dumbledore. Indeed, though it is a law seldom used. Lord Black is correct. It is in the current charter within which we have our current freedom and liberties. The nervous shuffling increased around Harry, the discomfort of his peers elevating significantly, and if any refuses, their assets can be frozen, and they can be deemed wanted by the Ministry of Magic, he added. Then why the bloody hell has that not been done? Tiberius Ogden asked. Because Cornelius had his head in the sand, and Rufus did not know it was a possibility. He was the head of the damned Aurora department. Surely he should be well versed in our laws, Lady Danvers interjected. Apparently not, Lord Greengrass huffed, loud enough to be heard throughout the room. Rufus could only pale as his ineptitude was being exposed. It was an old law and not one he would have come across often, if at all. Chances are he had read it sometime or other, but it was not important to his position. However, it had proven that was no longer the case. As minister, that could have proven to be a boon, but would he have implemented it? Perhaps, though he could not be certain. One would paint a rather large target on his back. He was certainly keen to get rid of the Dark Lord, but not at the expense of his own life, nor of his loved ones. Taking his seat once more when none spoke up in his defense, he slumped defeatedly. Harry Black had all but sealed his fate with his input throughout the morning. Bastard, he grumbled lowly. If there is nothing else that needs be said, we shall cast our votes, Dumbledore announced. All in favor of Rufus Scrimgeour, raise your wands. Rufus chanced to glance around the room, his heart sinking at the meager number of wands showing him favor. Those in favor of James Potter, Dumbledore called. There were several more for the Potter Lord, with many abstaining from the vote, predominantly those surrounding the new Lord Black. For them, there was no choice. Harry Black had seen to that personally. The votes have been tallied, and it is my esteemed duty to announce the ascension of Lord James Potter to the post of Minister of Magic. May your tenure be prosperous for the people of Britain, Dumbledore concluded, his gavel crashing down a final time. Immediately, James was accosted by journalists baying for interviews, photographers trying to capture the perfect shot, and other lords congratulating him or simply taking the opportunity to gain favor with the new minister. Harry stood satisfied with his day's work. Now, he could truly act against Tom without subterfuge, the blessing of the new minister in no doubt. He stilled as a hand grasped his shoulder tightly before he could take his leave. You've just sealed your fate, Black, a voice growled in his ear, the hot breath of the man causing him to grimace. As quickly as a serpent snatching up its prey, he turned and seized the one who dared to touch him by the throat, his eyes blazing and the fury rolling off him. No, you have sealed yours. I will see you very soon, he promised. The man's own orbs filling with fear at the use of Parseltongue. Harry shoved him away, and managed to vanish through the fireplace without being impeded further. How did it go? Arcturus questioned, the man clearly having waited for him within the Lord's solar. It's done, Harry confirmed. It won't long before Tom is forced into action. Arcturus nodded appreciatively. You've done well, Harry, he praised. Harry bowed gratefully at the praise. Who is the flat-faced fool? Flat-faced? Harry nodded. That would be Parkinson. Why? Arcturus asked with a frown. He's next on my list. Break. The newspaper clutched in his hands trembled in his grip, the fury coursing through his veins the reason for the tremor. The expected triumphant resurrection had been in tatters since the fateful night in the graveyard of his Muggle ancestors. It should have been simple, the murder of the Potter brothers cementing his legacy, leaving Wizarding Britain in his fearful grip. Ultimately that had not come to pass. The elder brother had eluded death once more and foiled his plans. Potter, he hissed, piquing the interest of his familiar. Now the bane of his life was not only Harry Potter but his meddlesome father and now Minister of Magic, James. His jaw clenched as he skimmed over the front page of the Daily Prophet, the sinking in his stomach increasing and fury flaring once more. Minister Potter calls all carriers of the Dark Mark in for questioning. Minister Potter gives new powers to the Aurora Air Force. Minister Potter carries out search of Ministry 11 Death Eaters found. Minister Potter declares war on he who must not be named. It went on and on. In less than 48 hours in office, Potter had all but crippled his forces. He no longer had any spies within the ministry, and those that were in a position to feed him information had been neutralized and needed to go to ground. The work was already in motion to house them all within Malfoy Manor, a building he had now full control of. Despite Lucius's protestations, however, the damage had already been done. On the very same page of the newspaper singing the praises of Potter, the very bottom corner announced the horrific murder of Gordon Parkinson, the body being found under the Dark Mark on his own grounds. It had been his daughter Pansy that had found him. Voldemort shook his head. He had been able to do nothing to prevent these deaths. He had checked the wards on each murder scene himself, and none had been tampered with in any way. It was as though a ghost was committing the atrocities. The Dark Lord knew better. Potter, he ground out, his fury this time directed towards the younger. He didn't know how, but the boy was responsible for these deaths. It could only be him. The only other he knew that would be capable of such was his former headmaster, and Dumbledore certainly did not have the fortitude to carry out these acts. Despite his cowardly reticence, the interfering old fool would have to be dealt with. He had been a thorn in his side for too long. He was pulled from his thoughts by the twitching heap on the floor, moaning pitifully. Lucius had fallen further from grace than the Dark Lord ever thought possible, with himself and those that once danced to his tune without question. Ever since he had attempted to exert himself over the Blacks, his life had fallen apart. He had lost his fortune, lost his position as an advisor to the minister, and had failed his master time and time again. The once charismatic lord was now pathetic, the only worthwhile thing about him now being the house he provided. Voldemort curled his lip in distaste. He couldn't kill the man yet, but he could certainly punish the fool. Go and fetch your spawn, Lucius, he commanded. He does wish for the opportunity to earn my favor, does he not? Any denial Lucius may have offered died on his lips, as the red eyes of the Dark Lord bored into his own. With no other choice he nodded and dragged himself from the room. Pathetic, Voldemort muttered, as he began pacing. The problem that needed his focus most was that of the minister. James Potter would need to be eliminated at the earliest possible convenience, and then, his son, the boy, was proving to be quite the annoyance and threat, the latter begrudgingly being admitted. Dumbledore would also need to be handled, but that would be down to the Malfoy boy. Regardless of the outcome, it was a positive for Voldemort. If the boy was successful, which he highly doubted, he could simply kill Lucius, or have his own son do it as a final test of his loyalty. He grinned at the thought. Were he to fail, as expected, he would consider the failings of the father redeemed. The thought of Lucius sniveling over the body of his inept offspring brought a cruel smile to his lips. He removed it as best he could when the door opened, admitting the boy of his thoughts. He bowed clumsily before him, disgusting him more than the man that had spewed him from his loins. My lord, Draco greeted him cockily, The Dark Lord allowed it on this one occasion, making a mental note to punish the brat for his arrogance later. Draco, I believe time is right for you to join our ranks. What say you?" The boy smirked, and Voldemort had to fight the urge to curse him. He lacked any semblance of humility, and it sickened him. It was boys like this that felt they could make his own life miserable at school, until he proved he was their better. "It is all I have wished for, my lord," Draco replied. This time Voldemort did smile. That stupid grin would soon leave the face of the foolish boy. Of that he had no doubt. Either way, the future was not bright for Draco Malfoy. Break. His path through the empty halls of the castle had led him to the gargoyle that guarded the entrance to the headmaster's office. Thankfully, he had discussed the opportunity offered to him by the man with his son who had gifted his blessing. Unquestionably, had he not, it was likely he would have entered the school via the Shrieking Shack, a previous haunt of years gone by, and would have found himself trapped within the ward Harry had placed over the building. Chuckling, he shook his head. Harry was every bit as sneaky as he had once been. For him, however, his own mischievous proclivities had abandoned him during the course of one night. Harry had needed him to be responsible, and for his son, it was the very least he deserved. "Sirius Black to see Professor Dumbledore," he announced to the stone creature, who remained unmoving for a moment before it sprung to the side to admit him. With a nod, Sirius stepped upon the platform and began his ascent. Still, he questioned, had he made the correct decision regarding his future? It was not something he had truly considered, not until his family had been forced back to these shores the previous year. He had dedicated his life to Harry, something he would trade for nothing. Raising the boy and watch him grow into the man he was becoming was more fulfilling than he could have imagined. He had been lucky enough to share the laughter and the tears with the new head of house, had been there to cure his ills and be his confidant when he needed one. Harry no longer needed him so. It saddened the man, but he couldn't be prouder. For all he had done or wanted to do, being with Harry made everything pale in comparison. "Come in, Sirius." The voice of the headmaster pulled him from his thoughts. Sirius pushed open the door and stepped into the office that hadn't once changed since he had first been called here in his first year of schooling. He had accidentally created a potion that turned Snape's hair a vivid pink that Slughorn couldn't reverse. He had served 6 weeks of detention until the man had managed the feat, a detention given to him by the very same offering him employment. "Might I assume that you are here to discuss my wish for you to assume the post of defense against the Dark Arts Professor?" The old man questioned hopefully as he gestured for Sirius to take a seat. The Black nodded as he lowered himself into the plush chair. "I have decided I will accept under certain conditions." Dumbledore leaned forward, his chin resting against steepled fingers, as his eyes twinkled merrily. "What conditions would they be, Sirius?" "There will be no prying from you, or any other staff member about my family, my son especially. I will retain the right to leave the castle the evenings I am not required to be here, and you will meet with Harry, when the time is right, to answer any questions he has frankly about Voldemort." Dumbledore nodded severely after pausing. "Does the final request come from Harry himself?" "It does," Sirius confirmed. "Without going into much detail, he is making considerable progress in bringing him down. He is certain you have information he needs to finish the job permanently." "Undoubtedly," Dumbledore concurred. "I would be pleased to meet with him, and I can promise I will be as open with him as he with me. I believe that for Tom to be defeated, it will take the combined knowledge from myself and his skill, though Harry has already proven himself a worthy adversary. I found myself exceedingly impressed with him during his debut in the Wizengamot. He is an exceptional young man," he finished with a bow. "Then you have yourself a new defense professor," Sirius returned with a nod. "The rest of the staff will be delighted with your appointment, as am I. Even Snape." Dumbledore's beard twitched in amusement before he let out a chuckle. "I do believe Severus may be less so. His memory is long after all, and one does not tend to forget years of mutual dislike such as those the two of you shared. That is only if he escapes imprisonment. Our new minister has insisted on everyone that carries the mark in for questioning." Dumbledore sighed. "Severus has proven his loyalty to me. I have no doubt he will emerge from this necessity without cause for concern." Sirius nodded. as he stood. "I do hope so, for your sake and his. Should he prove to be a threat to my son, I will personally kill him. It will no longer be prank spells aimed in his direction," he warned. Without waiting for a reply, Sirius took his leave, intent on enjoying his final 2 weeks of peace before he would take up his post. A part of him felt as though he had a purpose once more, the other that being at Hogwarts would be more trouble than it was worth. He could only hope the worst he faced would be reaping what he had once sown. A few pranks here or there he wouldn't mind, but something told him things within the castle would be much more sinister in nature than when he was a student here. Things within the Auror department were changing rapidly under the new leadership of James Potter. Already he had issued the decree of killing Death Eaters on sight if it were not possible to bring them in safely, and the entire team was currently under review. To ensure competence from the very top all the way down to the trainees, Potter was taking no chance with the lives of the Aurors, and Tonks couldn't help but think the changes being made were much needed, if what she felt could be called relief. What Moody was experiencing could only be described as something closely resembling Etsache's. Even with his limp, the spring in his step was evident as milled around, muttering about a return to the old ways. It was strange to see the man so jovial. The same, however, could not be said for much of the department. Many had become complacent over the years, had fallen into the laxity allowed by Fudge's regime. For them this was a shock to the system, and one they would have to get over quickly should they wish to keep their positions. Minister Potter had made it very clear that if you weren't up to scratch, you would be gone. Tonks had no worries. She had been under the tutelage of Mad-Eye, and any laxity, laziness or incompetence was dealt with harshly and efficiently. The man was not one to suffer laziness or idleness lightly. She herself had just returned from the training room, having been put through her paces by her mentor James Potter and Amelia Bones, to prove that she was worthy of her role. She was exhausted by the ordeal. Moody, unsurprisingly, had been her harshest critic, whereas both Potter and Bones seemed impressed by her capabilities, both having earned reputations amongst their peers for being exceptional with a wand. For Tonks, the rumors and stories did the duo no justice. Amelia Bones was fast, and not even for a woman of her age. Very few would be able to cope with the pace she kept during a duel. James Potter was more than she had ever expected. She had heard tales of the man and his skill in transfiguration, which he proved were not unfounded. His wand work in the branch was second to none. She had never witnessed someone with such a gift cast such difficult spells with ease. What she had not expected from him was the battle magic he had employed, and neither had Moody or Bones, judging by their reactions. Battle magic itself was a specialist branch, taking years to master, even the most basic of practices. James Potter had clearly worked on it. For how long she couldn't be sure, but he was a man that should certainly not be crossed. There was a darkness within him. Whether it had existed before Charlie had died, she couldn't be certain, but staring into those hazel eyes as he blankly casted spells that would end lives in a violent and inhumane manner, had left her flabbergasted. She shook her head from the thoughts, pleased that he was one of the purebloods that had not joined the Dark Lord. "How was it, Tonks?" Kingsley questioned as he entered her cubicle. The young woman shrugged dismissively. She was still wary of many of her colleagues, particularly those that had aligned themselves with Dumbledore after everything the man had done. "As expected," she replied. Kingsley released a deep breath as he shook his head. "I think we need to talk." "No, we don't," Tonks bit back. "You made your choice the moment you sided with him. Other than work, we have nothing to discuss." "Can you not see it?" Kingsley hissed. "The murders, the disappearances, all of them are being carried out by the Blacks. Your boyfriend." "Do not speak about things you have no idea about," Tonks growled, her fury rising. "If Harry is behind them, then why have you not arrested him? You know as well as I do. There is no proof." Kingsley sighed. "If there was, I would have him." Tonks chuckled. "If you believe that you are capable of bringing him in, then why don't you? I'm sure if you fed him Varitarum and it proved he was behind them, that would be all the evidence you would need." "It isn't that simple." "Exactly. So until you have irrefutable proof, keep your nose out of my personal life." So be it, Kingsley replied before turning sharply away and leaving her alone in her cubicle. She deflated into her chair, releasing a deep breath. She didn't have anything personal against Kingsley, other than the fact he was choosing to support the man that had caused Harry so much misery. Of course, he was not to know that, but he had no right to pass judgment on what Harry was doing. Nobody did. Even she herself had found it difficult to come to terms with the apparent callous murder. Such, however, was not the case. She had grown to know the boy better than any other, and she understood why he was doing what he was. It was not because he was evil and simply wanted vengeance, though she was aware that played a large part in his motivation for his actions. Were it merely for revenge, she would take the same stance she had chosen, but it went further, much deeper than how it would appear, as she found out only the previous day. Flashback. In a rare moment of peace, Harry and Tonks were walking hand in hand across a beach in the east of England. The evening summer breeze tousling their hair as sea would submerge their ankles when the tide came in, being so close to the water as they were. Suddenly Harry stopped and bent down to pick up a sizable pebble. He inspected it for a moment before skimming it across the surface of the sea, watching it until it vanished soundlessly amongst the waves. "I'm not doing what I am because I enjoy it," he said, just loud enough to be heard over the crashing water. Tonks frowned in his direction. It was perhaps the worst-kept secret between the two. Both were aware that he was behind the attacks on the Death Eaters. They just never discussed it. "I didn't say anything," she returned. Harry shook his head, smiled sadly, and wrapped an arm around her shoulder. "You don't have to. But if I'm going to marry you one day, you have the right to know. If anyone does, you deserve to know me. If you decide to marry me," Tonks pointed out. "Come on, Dora. Do you really think there is anyone else I want to spend the rest of my life with? I would marry you tomorrow if you would have me." Tonks blushed as she pushed him away playfully. "I told you not to say things like that, unless you mean them." "I wouldn't say it if I didn't," Harry replied, pulling her back closer to him. "Anyway, that doesn't matter right now." Tonks said nothing and simply looked on as Harry gazed towards the horizon and the setting sun. At first it was about revenge. "I wanted him to pay for what he'd done to Charlie. I still do," he added, frowning. "But there is more to it than that. I want to stop him putting anyone else through what he did to me. I want to stop him hurting people. I suppose a part of me thinks I'm one of very few capable of it." Tonks giggled. "You are a good person, Harry, better than anyone else knows. You want to help the people. There's nothing wrong with that." Harry snorted. "I don't care about them, not really," he denied, "but I don't want them to suffer unnecessarily. Nobody deserves what Tom has done to those that don't agree with him. I'm still a selfish git," he sighed. Tonks shook her head. "You are a good persona, Harry, a lot like Arcturus and probably a black to the very core. But there's more to you than that. You want to help those that can't help themselves, just because you can. That makes you the best person I know." Harry smiled at her slightly. "I just didn't want you to think I was doing this because I liked it. I'm doing this because somebody must. It matters to me how you see me." Tonks leaned up and kissed him on the cheek. "There is nothing you could do that would make me question you, Harry. I've seen enough of you to know you're not just another evil bastard seeking power. You're much more than that, and nobody can tell you any differently. You have your reasons for what you're doing, and that is all that matters. It just makes it easier knowing you are doing it for the right ones. If not, I'd have to arrest you." Harry raised an eyebrow in her direction. "Do you think you could manage it?" "Maybe if I used all my charm," she replied in a whisper, leaning in for a kiss. As Harry closed his eyes to return the gesture, she shoved him as hard as she could, sending him crashing into an oncoming wave as she ran as fast as her legs could carry her. Harry sputtered as he surfaced, shocked by the attack. His clothes and hair were sodden, and he laughed as he watched the aura stumbling away from him across the damp sand. Shaking his head, he uprated and appeared in front of her, a little closer than he had anticipated, and the two collided, sending them both to the ground. "Did you forget you were a witch?" Harry asked from his position beneath the woman. "Maybe I wanted you to catch me," she returned breathily before giving him the previously promised kiss. "I love you," Harry muttered against her lips, his eyes closed as he basked in the warmth of the embrace, despite his drenched clothing. I love you, Tonks replied after a moment, taken aback that it had been him to profess it first. End of flashback. For the first time since she had met him, she had felt worthy of his affection. There were no lingering doubts about his intentions, though she already knew deep down he was like no other she had ever met. He was none of the fools that had tried to court her simply for what she was. He was different, and she could be no more grateful for his presence in her life. She winced slightly as she stood, the aches and pains surfacing now that the adrenaline from her assessment with her superiors had come and gone. As much as she could happily reminisce about her time with the young man occupying her thoughts, she still had her part to play in bringing an end to the Dark Lord, though he himself and his followers had been unusually quiet since Potter had taken office. Tonks, however, had a feeling the peace as unlikely to last. It was only a matter of time before they emerged from the shadows and continued with their work. It was inevitable. Break. Harry shook his head as he placed another sheet of parchment on the substantial pile already read through and digested. When he had approached Rita for any information she had on Dumbledore, he had not expected such an exhaustive plethora of parchment. Ream upon ream had been bestowed upon him, and it had taken a few days to navigate his way through all of it. Not wanting to dismiss anything lest it prove to be useful, he scoured each page meticulously. From everything he had read on the man, it was clear Rita had enough to ruin his reputation. The surprising close friendship with Grindelwald, his father's imprisonment for attacking Muggles, and even the tragic death of his younger sister. There was much the man need to answer for, but Harry was interested in only a few of the many revelations he had become aware of. At first he had been skeptical of what the woman had provided, her inclination towards sensationalism too strong to ignore. His doubts, however, were soon put to rest. Rita was in no position to lie to him. Her life meant much more to her than that. He released a deep breath, as he pondered just how he could use all of it to his advantage, dismissing idea upon idea quickly. Dumbledore was a man of wit and intelligence. Such approaches that he would rather employ would be fruitless with the man. An open and honest conversation would be best, though Harry was reluctant to engage in it. He dragged a hand through his hair as he released a deep breath. If he wanted to make progress with Tom, Dumbledore was a necessary evil he would have to unfortunately deal with. There was no doubt the headmaster knew him better than any, and more importantly, Harry couldn't help but believe he had hidden a Horcrux within the Chamber of Secrets. Harry didn't have a clue where in the castle it would be found, and the name didn't give him much of hope of finding it without assistance. He couldn't deny Dumbledore would be his best option overall, and could even shed some light on other questions he had, particularly about Grindelwald and the use of the Hallows symbol. Something there did not add up, and if the headmaster was as close to him as Rita believed, he would have some useful knowledge. Tired of reading about the misdeeds of the revered man, he placed the large stack in the drawer of his desk before securing it with a Parseltongue command. Sooner rather than later, the meeting between the two would have to take place. It mattered not if he killed Tom before any other Horcruxes were destroyed, but he would rather the man be finished permanently than risk another resurrection further down the line. His best option currently was working with the first man he had come to hate. Harry, however, was no fool. An enemy of an enemy does not make a friend, so he would approach the situation carefully, giving nothing unless needed and taking all he could. Break. James Potter would have once relished holding his once mortal enemy in the position Severus Snape found himself in. The man was bound to a chair in one of the interrogation rooms in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, ready to be administered veritaserum. Now such a thing seemed so petty, the hardships the minister had faced to be granted this occasion proving to be too high a price. "I suppose you are enjoying this, Potter?" the sallow-skinned man drawled calmly. James shook his head. "Much less than you would believe," he replied tiredly. A lot rode on the next moments of questioning. Dumbledore had staunchly stood behind Snape, had insisted he was on their side, had turned cloak on who the man insisted was his former master. James had always had his doubts that would either be founded or put to rest. "Administer the potion," he commanded. The Potania that had been brought in for the task nodded before setting about his work. He placed the required 3 drops on the tongue of the professor and waited a moment before nodding that it had taken effect. The man had been exceedingly busy the past few days, today particularly so. Severus Snape was among the best in the field, and more than exceptional in the mind arts. Thus the mixture given to the man was considerably more potent than was usual practice. James could not risk something of such import being risked because he was not thorough. "What is your name?" Amelia Bones questioned. "Severus Tobias Snape," the man answered, struggling against the effects of the potion. "Do you support Lord Voldemort?" "No," Snape answered emphatically, surprising James with how strong the denial was. "Have you taken or followed any orders from him since his return?" "Yes." Amelia frowned. "What have you done for him?" "I have created restorative potions for him and the Death Eaters he freed from Azkaban." "Why?" "Because I am a spy for Albus. Since the last war, I have been working with him to bring the Dark Lord down." Amelia stared at the man in surprise, her gaze shifting to Dumbledore, who was also required to be present for the proceedings. "Is this true?" The headmaster nodded severely, all trace of benevolence absent. "Have you ever followed the Dark Lord willingly?" "Yes," Snape answered before Dumbledore could protest. Amelia silenced the man with a stern glare before continuing. "Why did you switch sides?" "The reasons are personal and unimportant," Dumbledore interjected. "Severus has proven his innocence and loyalty." "Hey, loyalty to you," Amelia returned, "not his innocence." "That's enough," James broke in. As far as he was concerned, the details did not matter. Snape had proven himself in his eyes, and there was little else he wanted to know about him. He had his suspicions but did not want them confirmed. Give him the antidote and let him go. If he proves to be a threat, he will be dealt with accordingly. Amelia thought better of arguing, and nodded her agreement. It was beneficial to them to have the man continuing in his capacity rather than locking him up to rot. When all was said and done, he could always be put on trial for his past crimes if she or the minister deemed it necessary. Snape quickly snapped out of his stupor, his eyes switching between those within the room wildly in confusion. When he remembered where he was, his lip curled in distaste as he stared at his former nemesis. "Happy?" he muttered. "No, Severus, I'm not. For what it is worth, I misjudged you. I can only say that I am glad I was wrong. I was not looking forward to telling Lily her childhood friend would have to be executed." With his final words spoken, James left the room, head shaking. Dumbledore sighed at his departure. The once cheerful, mischievous boy he had enjoyed roaming the halls of Hogwarts nowhere to be seen. "Losing his son has changed him," Amelia broke the awkward silence. "He's not the same man that he was in the auras even 6 months ago," she thought. For the briefest second, a flash of sadness could be seen in the eyes of Severus Snape, but it was gone before she could question it further. "Alas, such tragedy tends to leave its scars," Dumbledore concurred. "For many of us." Amelia could only frown at the strange statement as the room emptied around her. Pondering the words, she understood. She too had lost her family, and it had irrevocably changed her. The James Potter she had once known was not likely to be seen again. For Voldemort it could prove to his worst nightmare, and for those that cared for the man, it would stand as a reminder of the smile that once adorned his features when he spoke so proudly of his children, both lost to him in their own ways. His efforts to bring Tom down were starting to become frustrating. Since James had taken the post of minister, the Death Eaters had gone to ground, hidden away from their homes to avoid capture by the ministry, or they had now come to fear being attacked in the night by him. Whatever the reason, each house he had visited these past nights had proven to be wasted. It hadn't taken long for him to track them down, though he was not foolish enough to attempt something with so many present. They had taken up residence in Malfoy Manor, numbering more than he had been expecting. For now, however, it mattered not. His attention had been turned towards another venture, one that could prove to be fruitful in his conversation with Dumbledore. It had been something that he had been pondering since his discovery of the first 2 Hallows, and his inquiries had led him to believe that Grindelwald had once possessed the wand from the tale of the 3 brothers. The use of the symbol could not be a coincidence, judging by the nature of the man. Cassie had been surprised by his sudden interest in the once feared Dark Lord, but had not questioned it, only looked at him strangely when he mentioned the wand he used. The woman had helpfully revealed Gellert had carried 2 wands, one that he claimed to have won the allegiance of later in life, When asked to describe it, it matched perfectly the wand that the Hogwarts headmaster used, the bone white down to the very elderberries that adorned it. To be certain of his suspicions, he had one last visit to make, one conversation with a man who knew wands better than any. The bell jingled as he entered the humble shop, the candles levitating by the walls, the only source of light. Behind the counter, stack upon stack of boxes stood almost reaching the ceiling. His observations were cut short by the approaching sound of shuffling feet, and only a moment later the proprietor entered from a back room. Lord Black," Ollivander greeted him with a bow, his keen grey eyes surveying him with interest. "Mr. Ollivander," Harry replied respectfully. People who practiced the art of wand lore were exceedingly rare indeed. It was believed by many that the craft was not something that could be learnt, that someone had to be born with the inherent skill to make them. That skill would be honed from a very young age until one was ready to begin their career. By the field, something that seldom happened. The Ollivander family had been known for the practice for centuries and revered across the globe for their work. "What is it I can do for you?" the elderly man questioned curiously. Harry considered his next words carefully, not wanting to draw suspicion to himself. "I was hoping to have a discussion with you about my wand," he began. "Quite the wand, and quite the connection you share with it. Even after all my years, things still have the ability to surprise me. What is it I can assist you with?" Harry released a deep breath before continuing. "You said yourself that the wand does not influence magical power, without being too immodest. I am quite a powerful wizard. How can you be sure that wands don't have that ability?" Ollivander nodded appreciatively at the question before chuckling. "A wand is simply a wand, Lord Black. The stronger the connection, the better it will work for you. Yours is unique. I have never come across a wand with such fierce loyalty. I imagine it is much to do with how you came upon the core, the bonding between yourself and the creature, and how it was willingly given. You don't quite believe it," he finished, a frown marring his features. "Forgive me, wand lore is not something I have any skill with. It's just hard to believe that a wand has no influence over magical power." "It does indeed, but the power it influences comes from within you," Ollivander countered. He stared at Harry speculatively before nodding to himself. "Perhaps a demonstration would be prudent, yes. I myself am curious to see something. Would you humor me?" Harry nodded, truly enjoying the conversation with the man, though it was not progressing how he had intended. Ollivander swept into the back room and returned a few minutes later, clutching a box in his hands, his eyes alight with interest. "This wand," he said, gesturing to the box he carried, "I believed was destined for your younger brother. When it did not bond with him, questions formed that I believed would never be answered. He was the one said to have put an end to the Dark Lord, and I believed for that reason this wand would be his." He opened the box to reveal a rather plain brown wand. To Harry it looked like any other wand possessed by a witch or wizard. "Take it, Lord Black," he urged. Tentatively Harry reached for the wand, pausing only a moment before grasping it in his hand. Immediately a powerful rush flowed through his veins, causing his hair to dance in a ripple of magical expulsion. It was a similar feeling to what he had felt when he first grabbed his own, only diluted. As quickly as it started, the feeling ended, the wand going cold in his hand. Ollivander huffed slightly and shook his head. "It recognizes you as its master, though it is bowing to the more dominant magic in your veins. It understands you already have a powerful bond with another. Perhaps in a different life, this would have been yours." The older man sighed as he took the wand and placed it back in the box. "What is going on?" Harry asked, confusedly. Ollivander offered him a sad smile. "This particular wand is made of holly and contains the feather of a phoenix. The very same phoenix gave another feather for a wand that was claimed some several decades ago." "Tom Riddle," Harry whispered. "Indeed, I remember the day he first came here to collect it. He was a very charismatic young man, beyond his years in magical power, just as you are. I told him he would become great. I was correct. His feats of magic are legendary, though he became terrible with it. He is Dumbledore's greatest mistake." "Dumbledore?" Ollivander nodded severely. Had he tempered the boy, mentored him even, young Tom could have been amongst the best of us today. Instead, Albus treated him with suspicion, kept him at arm's length. I believe he saw much of his former acquaintance in the boy and did not want to repeat history. Grindelwald, Harry muttered. A brief flicker of surprise glinted in those eerie eyes of the wand-maker before he nodded. A strange day it was when Albus arrived with the foreign boy asking questions about mythical wands. I did not believe that such astute men would be swayed by such tales. I advised them both to leave the legend be, but they didn't, Harry pointed out. Albus did. Grindelwald was convinced the Hallows were real. I too had fallen into the trap as a younger man, wasted years of my life in pursuing the Wand of Destiny. A fool's errand on my part. The Wand of Destiny. The Elder Wand. The Death Stick. It has been given many titles throughout its bloody history. So, you no longer believe in it? Ollivander's gaze turned speculative once more. I never stopped believing. I merely believe attempting to find the Hallows will prove to be the death of many. No, they are best left to wherever they rest. Harry nodded. Thank you, Mr. Ollivander, for your time. Ollivander bowed respectfully. If you are indeed in pursuit of the Hallows, I believe a chat with Albus would be beneficial. I can only judge by what I see, and the wand he collected from my father is not the one he uses now. Of course, there may be a perfectly innocent reason for this, he concluded with a shrug. Why would you tell me that? Harry asked with a frown. Because Albus will not right his own wrongs, and I believe that it is you doing all you can to put an end to the Dark Lord. I have my doubts the Elder Wand could serve you any better than the one you have, but I may be wrong. I wish you luck, Lord Black. The Wand of Destiny couldn't be in more safe hands. Stay safe, Mr. Ollivander, Harry responded before he exited the shop, the word destiny turning his thoughts back to the prophecy he had retrieved all those months ago. He shook his head. To him, the prophecy mattered not, nor did retrieving the Elder Wand, as much as the Wand-maker believed. Prophecy and wand or not, it was he that would put an end to Tom Riddle because the man had wronged him so unforgivably. Destiny had nothing to do with it as far as he was concerned. He dissipated away, his mind not focused on his surroundings, as they would usually be. A pair of curious watched and widened as they noted just whom it was they had seen exiting the shop. He too vanished, hoping a reward would be due from his master for the information he was bringing him. Preek! It was the very next evening that Harry found himself sat across the desk from the revered headmaster, the two staring with expectance and intently at one another. Harry had never seen the man the same way the rest of the wizarding world seemingly did. The man sat before him was seen without the rose-tint glasses, the manipulation hidden in the warm benevolence not hidden well enough from the younger man that knew better, that had experienced firsthand the lengths that would be traversed by this humorously clad master of subterfuge. No, Albus Dumbledore was not the Gentile saintly picture of innocence he had worked so hard to portray. He was a puppet master, as skilled as they came in the art of cunning, spouting flowery flattery to lull the unsuspecting into his web of deceit. Before they knew it, these fools would be trapped and devoured, all the while believing it was all for their benefit. He narrowed his eyes at the man. He was no such fool, and would not fall victim as many that had come before him had. How many, he questioned, breaking the silence. He did not have the patience to waste any more time, ignoring the gentle probes of legilimency prodding his mind. Dumbledore cleared his throat. It would be helpful if you were to be a little more specific in your questioning, Harry. His nostrils flared in irritation. Horcruxes, he growled. How many has he made? I suppose that is why you sought out Slughorn and modified his mind. Dumbledore flinched at the accusation, but denied nothing and composed himself quickly. Horace was an unfortunate incident. He was rather reluctant to disclose anything pertaining to Tom. He released a deep breath before continuing. It is my firm belief that Tom has created no less than 7. Harry nodded. He had no reason to believe Dumbledore would mislead him when it came to the Horcruxes. Not when he seemed so sure it was Harry that it had to be Harry to finish Tom off. How many have you found? He pressed. Dumbledore deflated at the question. 1, he admitted, a diary that found its way into the possession of Ginevra Weasley. She had been consumed by the soul fragment before I could save her. She died when the diary was destroyed. Harry watched as the man's eyes filled with genuine remorse for the fate of the girl. That leaves only 2, Harry sighed. Dumbledore's gaze snapped up to his own, surprise replacing the mourning. Truly? He asked, relieved. The one in me, Slytherin's necklace, the Gaunt family ring and Hufflepuff's cup, he reeled off. I had my suspicions about the cup and necklace, the old man revealed. I believe I was on the cusp of locating the latter. Where did you find them? Harry grinned, unable to prevent the feeling of smugness of having outdone the headmaster. My grandfather found the necklace at our family home. Apparently my Uncle Regulus turned on Tom after he found out his secret. He replaced the one he knew of with a fake but didn't know how to destroy it. It has been dealt with. That is, I must say, quite the surprise, Dumbledore muttered. And the cup, much more difficult to retrieve. Harry snorted. It was in the Lestrange vault in Gringotts. Dumbledore frowned at the proclamation, trying to piece together the puzzle of how Harry had learned of the location. He nodded after a few moments, and chuckled. Lord Wayland, he guessed. He would have been in the most fortuitous of position to gain such information during his imprisonment. May I assume that it was done intentionally? You can assume what you will, Harry bit back. Genius, I must say, Dumbledore praised. Ignoring the acerbe tone, Arcturus could certainly arrange it. You have destroyed them. Harry nodded, not willing to admit they were still whole and functional after the soul fragments had been removed. What of the ring? Admittedly, it was not something I had considered. In what remained of the Gaunt family home, as a Parselmoth, it was not so difficult to obtain, though the curses on it would have defeated most. I would hazard a guess that even you would not have gotten it unscathed. The magic was subtle, but I know his magic better than any. That I do not dispute, Harry, Dumbledore admitted with an incline of his head. It does, however, leave us with two more to locate. Any thoughts? Harry leaned forward, resting his forearms on the desk. He wanted to see how forthcoming the headmaster was willing to be and did not feel comfortable sharing his thoughts before Dumbledore any further. What do you think? He pressed. Dumbledore met his stare equally before releasing a labored breath. Severus is quite concerned about Tom's snake. He believes he is able to exert far too much control over it, even for a Parselmoth. Harry hid a triumphant grin. My thoughts exactly. From the memories I have seen of their relationship, it goes beyond normal. Even with Mira, I cannot control her as he does with Nagini. She will not do something simply because I will it. Then I believe we have only one more to discover. I would be quite inclined to fathom a guess that Tom may have located another relic of our esteemed founders. As the heir of Slytherin, he would see them as his property. From what I know of him, he does not like the thought of anything he considers his own in the hands of others. Harry could see the logic in the thought process. The question remained, however, just what he could have used. His own knowledge of the founders was rather limited. This would have to be deferred to man in front of him. What items are known to exist? Dumbledore sighed and shook his head. Very few, many not having been seen in centuries. Godric was well known for his sword. Rowena had diadem that has not been seen since she herself roamed these halls, and the two items of Hufflepuff and Slytherin already used by Tom, he explained. A gentle cough caught the attention of the two. The sword of Gryffindor is safe, and can only be retrieved by one of noble intentions. I can personally attest to this, a beaten hat resting upon one of the many shelves around the room announced. Dumbledore frowned as he stood and approached the aged garment. How can you be certain? Because it is I that guards it, and none have ever proven worthy enough to be presented with it. Not even you, Albus. Dumbledore held his hands up and chuckled as Fawkes squawked indignantly. Then I am pleased it is safe. That does, however, leave us with only a diadem that has been lost for almost a millennium, he lamented. He fell silent, pondering just where to begin looking for such a thing. Harry, however, was not considering the item itself, but where it could be located. Before Dumbledore had even mentioned the demise of the Weasley girl, only one place made sense. A place that only Tom, as far as he knew, would likely be able to access. The Chamber of Secrets, he called, interrupting the man's newly adopted pacing. Dumbledore paused, his eyes glazing slightly as he shook his head. There is a danger that lurks within the chamber, one that I fear we would be unable to deal with. To do so, several others would need to be consulted and made aware of its existence. The only one to venture in and survive is Tom. I was unable to enter, despite my best efforts. Hagrid and I spent many weeks in the forest ensuring that any possible escape for the creature within was blocked. A basilisk? Harry surmised, the conversation with his brother so many moons fresh in his mind. All evidence suggests so, Dumbledore concurred. I fear that it should be left well alone. I would usually agree, but it is the only logical place that Tom would have hidden one. Dumbledore deflated as he nodded his agreement. I fear further that you are right, my boy, the old man conceded. Then let's get it over with. I'm sure that we can handle what is down there between the two of us. Harry prompted. Where's your sense of adventure? Dumbledore's beard twitched as he smiled. You are much more like Sirius and James than you know, he sighed. Very well, if I am to meet my end tonight, let it be in the pursuit of putting an end to Tom. Follow me, Harry. Ignoring the muttering of the hat that had addressed them, the two exited the office, and Dumbledore led the way down to the second floor and to a girl's bathroom. In here? Harry questioned, almost disappointed by the location. Think logically, Harry. Where better than a bathroom full of large pipes for a basilisk to emerge? True, Harry agreed as he pushed the door open, only for his wand to be in his hand a split second later as he came face to face with a rather disturbing apparition. Good evening, Myrtle, Dumbledore greeted her merrily. Don't mind us. We are simply investigating this rather wonderful bathroom you have made your home. The girl hiccuped as her face filled with fear. Those yellow eyes, she sobbed. Over there, she added, pointing to a sink before diving into a nearby toilet, sloshing the contents across the ground. Thankfully it was only water, and Harry cleared it away with a wave of his wand. When he turned, Dumbledore was already at the sink, his own wand in hand and muttering as he inspected the fitting. See here, a rather brilliantly concealed sign, he whispered, gesturing for Harry to join him. I found this the night Miss Weasley was possessed, but could proceed no further. Harry took in the image of the small snake engraved into the back of one of the taps, the magic coming off it almost non-existent. As subtle as it was, it held a familiarity to him. It was not Tom's, but had many similarities. Slytherin, he whispered as he pressed his wand to the snake. It began moving, though it stayed in the same spot, the dim light of the bathroom making it appear as if moving gently across the faucet. Frowning, he reached out with just a finger and brushed it against the brass, nodding satisfactorily as he did so. Open, he hissed. Both he and Dumbledore took a step back as the sink groaned and sunk into the floor, disappearing into the abyss, leaving only a large hole in its wake. Excellently done, Harry, Dumbledore praised. And yet something so simple, unable to be replicated by any other. Ignoring the words of the man, he sent a bright ball of light down what revealed itself to be a tunnel, his eyes widening slightly as it vanished, leaving the darkness to prevail once again. Well, I can't imagine Slytherin creating an entrance that would kill him, he shrugged as he cast a cushioning charm on himself. Shall we? Before Dumbledore could object, Harry had jumped into the hole, leaving the man to catch him up in his own time. For a solid half-minute, Harry sped through the twists and turns, and was expelled suddenly and violently out of the end, landing in a heap amongst a pile of bones situated at the bottom. Glad he had cast the charm, he pushed himself to his feet with barely a second to spare before Dumbledore shot from the tunnel, laughing almost giddily. I must say, I could think of no way more exhilarating to find such a sought-after place, he announced, struggling to his feet. Harry had to agree. Despite the nature of the visit, the tunnel had been quite a pleasant surprise. Apparently Dumbledore too was an adrenaline seeker. Not commenting on it any further, he conjured another ball of light and sent it ahead of them through the only way forward. Another tunnel, this one, however, having to be navigated through walking. Dumbledore cut in front of him as he took his first steps towards it, pausing briefly to offer a look of apology. Forgive me, Harry, but in this instance you're much more valuable to the world than I. If the serpent is loose, I am much more dispensable than yourself.